Hey everyone, if my math is correct, by the time you're watching this, the channel should have reached 400,000 subscribers, which is completely not deserved, but also completely useless as a number, but also a big ego boost, so well, thanks to everyone who subscribed. Anyway, this week in this episode, we've got more AI slop invading bug reports for open source projects, notably for curl and making everyone's life miserable. We also have Google confirming that they are indeed going to merge Android and ChromeOS, and this could have implications for Linux as a whole. And we have plenty of other things, including this message from our sponsor. This video is sponsored by TuxCare. Basically, they are your open source Swiss Army knife. They have solutions that will let you automate and simplify all the maintenance steps of your open source tech stack, thanks to their various security and support offerings. You have their famous rebootless patching, but they also have endless lifecycle support for various open source technologies that are end of life or no longer receive standard vendor support, like end-of-life Linux distros, open source applications, languages and runtimes like AngularJS, for example. Specifically, with endless lifecycle support for AngularJS, they offer long-term security support for versions 1.5 through 1.8.3, including some core components like Angular messages, animate, touch, resource, cookies, or route. With this support, you can either keep using the software you currently use without a time limit, or you can plan a transition at your own pace without any looming deadline. It also helps ensure adherence to your security compliance obligations. Setting up endless support is as easy as adjusting a config file to get the patched versions straight from TuxCare. Click the link in the description to learn more about endless lifecycle support for AngularJS, but also for other end-of-life projects like Linux distributions, software development frameworks, or languages. It's all at the same link. So, Google's president of Android at Google gave a little interview to TechRadar, and within it he slipped a little nugget of information saying that ChromeOS and Android were going to be combined into a single platform. They're also saying that they are very interested in seeing how people use their laptops because, well, they don't really have real laptops these days. They have Chromebooks, which don't really work like full-blown laptops. We already knew that ChromeOS was going to move away from a real, full-blown Linux system, getting its underpinnings and libraries from Android instead, but this basically confirms that the two systems are going to merge. It's not just ChromeOS grabbing a few elements from Android, but still existing as its own platform. Now, they're gonna be the exact same thing, so probably you're gonna buy laptops running Android. Google is also trying to implement a better multi-window desktop multitasking interface into Android, and the first Android 16 beta shows some of that. There's likely another component around that. Google might be forced to sell the Chrome browser at some point if the current US-based antitrust issues go further. And since ChromeOS is basically just Google Chrome running on top of a Linux base, this could have all kinds of implications for ChromeOS's existence. By replacing all of that base with Android, they only have one system to manage, and if Chrome has to go away and be sold, chances are Google can just strike a deal to have it pre-installed by default, or they could even just build their own web browser anew. This also has implications around Linux. Google does contribute to Linux for Android, for servers, but also on the drivers front for their Chromebooks. They would likely still need to do that, fortunately, even by replacing ChromeOS with a desktop version of Android, because Android would still need drivers for these laptops or these desktops. So chances are this won't really change the level of work or contribution or pressure that they put on manufacturers. This will not be ready anytime soon. The first tests of Android desktop mode in Android 16 beta seem to find it much worse than what Samsung did with DeX a few years ago, so there is still some time before ChromeOS goes away, and maybe the Linux version of Chrome with it, although I doubt that this would happen. But let's be fair, Google doesn't really care all that much about desktop Linux. The only reason that they do have apps available for it is because they have ChromeOS, which is a Linux-based system. If there's no longer ChromeOS as a Linux base, they're going to provide everything as an Android app, And so Linux might be left by the wayside, including Chrome for Linux, which, you know what? Yeah, let's get rid of that. Maybe people will switch back to a non-Chromium-based browser instead. Now, all in all, this probably won't really affect the Linux landscape much. ChromeOS's market share has been falling and falling and falling across the world. It's just not a much used system. It's also pretty bad, as my review of ChromeOS Flex proved. It's just not a good operating system, and everywhere where you would have Chrome OS, you can just have a better experience by installing any other Linux distro. You still get the browser, you still get the browser apps, you can still get the Android apps, and you also get all the Linux apps. So Chrome OS doesn't really have a place. Android is likely going to be a better option on laptops and even maybe Chrome boxes or Android boxes, if it at least has a competent desktop interface. Now, if we needed another proof that unchecked AI is just a net negative for the world, projects are now being overwhelmed by AI-generated slop. Specifically, curl, for example, is now getting tons and tons of crappy bug reports that are just AI-generated. And when I'm saying tons and tons, it's tons and tons relative to curl's usual bug reports. It's not like they're getting hundreds every day. The project's lead developer simply cannot deal with that anymore. He says the general trend has been more and more AI slop. About 20% of bug submissions are now clearly AI generated and properly useless. This obviously drowns out all the real reports, and it makes triage and identifying what's a real issue and what should be worked on a lot harder. This might even lead to the bug bounty program for curl ending. This is something that rewards submissions that identify security vulnerabilities. It has already paid $90,000 since 2019, and it's helped identifying some flaws that curl then fixed. Technically, anyone submitting a bug report to that bounty program should disclose the use of AI, but of course they don't do that, either because they don't read the disclosure agreement, or they would just spam the bug bounty program using AI, and so they don't want to tell that they're using AI because they are just terrible people. The project lead said that you're generally just better off avoiding AI as a whole, which I entirely agree with. Each submission apparently takes from 30 minutes to 3 hours to be looked at, and each submission is looked at by 3 or 4 reviewers out of the 7 who work on the project. So that is a lot of wasted time. So even if these aren't hundreds of AI slop reports per month, it is still taxing on people. And the worst thing is that the project lead says that a lot of these bug reporters think that they really are helpful by submitting their AI-generated bug report, meaning that these people do not know anything about what they're trying to fix or the project. They're not even evil. They just really believe AI is capable of identifying giant flaws, and so they're just spamming projects with these bug reports trying to help. Let's face facts. Generative AI has just made the internet a way worse place. It's just pure garbage. It's misinformation, it's scams, it's spams, and the few legitimate use cases are drowned out by all the problematic ones. In the meantime, we're gonna have to find solutions or filters or tools to get rid of all that crap, and I don't know if that's even feasible anymore. Now, the GNOME Foundation is firing on all cylinders since they elected their new executive director. They've now been joined by Post-Market OS, maybe the best Linux on phones effort that we currently have. They've joined the GNOME Advisory Board, meaning maybe we'll see more effort on that front. Funding is also a big area the foundation is looking into, obviously, with a new donation page in the works to fund the work of specific contributors, letting people get a bird's eye view of what needs funding, who funds what, but also letting contributors apply for grants, for fellowships, and for jobs. They're also following the KDE route, trying to build partnerships with hardware makers like Framework or Slimbook to make sure that GNOME works really well on these devices out of the box, and maybe at some point showcasing the future GNOME OS as a pre-installed option, once at least it is a real option for a daily driver. Now, all this transparent communication and the efforts that they're making to try and make GNOME viable are, I think, a really good indication that the foundation is now in competent and good hands, so props to the new executive director. Looks like he's doing a good job, although the GNOME Foundation does have a long road ahead to actually become sustainable itself and then be able to invest in GNOME's developers. But it looks like they have the right ideas. We'll just have to wait and see if it actually works. Still on GNOME, there's some work happening on the parental controls section of GNOME, something I personally don't have an interest in because my only son is really hairy and is actually a cat, but I'm sure that this will help a lot of people who have kids. The goal is to redesign the parental controls UI to make it work like other parts of GNOME, so basically modernizing, libadwaitaing this part of GNOME. But they also want to have these controls integrated in the lock screen as well, and they want to add new features like screen time monitoring, screen time limits, bedtime schedules, and web filtering. All features that should probably be in any basic parental control software, so having that on GNOME directly is probably really good, because it really did not do anything if it didn't have that, did it? Work has been contracted, and the UI refresh is already completed, and it might even become part of GNOME 49 in September, although it's not certain yet. The next steps will be adding the page to let parents manage web filtering and screen time limits, which will probably be a huge help for using a Linux PC at home if you have kids. I never looked into parental control software on Linux because I don't have a kid, and although I am a kid in some ways, I do know how to self-regulate in most cases sometimes. But if you find this topic interesting, if you would like me to take a look at parental control software on Linux, leave me a comment down below and I'll do my best to check out all the available options. Now, PHP is proposing a license change to its entire codebase. PHP has been licensed under two separate custom ones, the PHP license for all the base language and the Zend Engine license for all the Zend Engine code, as they wanted to make sure you could use any of those two parts separately. But as both projects got more and more interconnected, this dual licensing scheme proved problematic, notably because it could make PHP incompatible with the likes of the GPL. So there is a new proposal to update that PHP license and that Zend license to instead adopt the 3-clause BSD license for both parts of PHP, starting with PHP 9. This would be an OSI-endorsed license, so it should be compatible with other free software and open source licenses, and it has minimal restrictions to use, package, modify, and redistribute the code. The change is being discussed currently. It will not change any of the rights granted by contributors or granted to users, so it doesn't seem like a bad idea on paper, although, as always, license changes are controversial. The proposal has a nice, detailed historical breakdown for why that dual licensing scheme was adopted and why the person behind the proposal thinks that this needs to change. PHP doesn't need permission from all of its contributors to change that license, but they want to do things properly, so they are holding a vote, and they're giving people 6 months of discussion before holding that vote. Which is probably the right way of handling this. Just because you don't have to ask for permission to change something doesn't mean you shouldn't consult the contributors and the community. So this is being done in the right way, and in the end it probably won't change anything for PHP developers and users. It's just going to simplify how you can integrate PHP in other projects, so probably a good thing. Now, as the NVK open source drivers for NVIDIA are now part of Mesa, and they allow NVIDIA GPUs to run demanding stuff without using the official drivers, Phoronix did a little benchmark of the official drivers versus the NVK plus Nouveau stack, and it looks like things aren't quite up to par just yet. The TLDR is that NVK plus Nouveau is currently giving you, on average, 45 to 47% of the performance of the official drivers on modern NVIDIA GPUs, which is, in my opinion, just not good enough to ever envision ditching the official modules. NVK does outperform the NVIDIA drivers in a few cases, in Vulkan benchmarks, but in most cases, whether you're using OpenGL or Vulkan, NVK is not even close. In games, the performance is way lower as well, with stuff like Arkham Knight or Counter-Strike 2 getting about 1/3 of the frames with NVK, and other games barely reaching half. Now, obviously, this is not criticism for NVK. They started work on it, I think, 2 years ago, and they're also still reliant on Nouveau, which is a very old kernel driver that just doesn't work well with recent NVIDIA GPUs. They do need to do a lot of optimization, but it's actually quite impressive that in 2 years they managed to get a driver that can actually run benchmarks and games and run them properly. Sure, the performance is not up to snuff, but it works. So it's still fantastic work. It's just not ready for daily use just yet, unless you only use your NVIDIA GPU to accelerate your desktop and video playback and your web browser, in which case you don't really need the NVIDIA modules anymore. You can just use Nouveau plus NVK, and that's actually a pretty good thing already. Now, a sign that Google is still willing to support some Linux hardware, they're proposing to change how haptic touchpads work on Linux. They offered a design proposal to change how the HID drivers that handle these input devices work, and also a change to how the user space drivers work as well. Now, this only affects touchpads that do not click physically, like the ones you would find on modern Macs, not your regular dive board touchpads that most laptops still use. The goal of their proposal is to have a standard protocol to allow user space apps to talk to these haptic touchpads and also to reduce duplication of code between vendors. This would allow apps to handle haptic feedback, like vibrating the touchpad when needed, but also potentially letting these apps act on certain presses with maybe certain force thresholds, like, for example, force clicking a word to get a definition, or force clicking a link to display a preview of the web page behind that link. Why this and why now? Well, there are apparently multiple projects to develop these touchpads outside of what Apple is currently doing. I would assume Google is working on one as well. And so to avoid multiple vendors developing multiple implementations, like what we've seen in the early days of touchpads on Linux, Google is trying to take the lead on it at the kernel level. Now, when I first used haptic touchpads on the first MacBook Pros that used them, I found them trash. They just did not replicate a real click. You could clearly feel that it was vibrating. The extra features stacked on them never really were all that interesting, but on the latest Macs that I tried, I think it's now suitable. I still kind of prefer the regular old diveboard touchpad. I don't quite see the need for the haptic ones, unless maybe they're like more resilient over time. I'm not sure about that. But hey, if they are going to happen on multiple other computers, then we might as well have a solid implementation for drivers on Linux. So if it's Google taking the lead, then fine, as long as it's all open source, I don't care. Now, Firefox 141 is getting WebGPU support, about 2 years after Chromium-based browsers implemented that same feature. WebGPU is a way to let web apps, or just websites, access the GPU directly, meaning it provides much better performance than stuff like WebGL. It is a W3C standard, and currently only Chrome and Chromium-based browsers support it. Firefox just added it, and Safari has yet to implement it, probably because they have to build the entire layer that talks to their own graphics API, instead of using something that is a multi-API. Unfortunately, WebGPU is Windows only for now on Firefox. It should come to Linux and macOS in a few months, because it is built using WGPU, which provides a way to just link that WebGPU to any graphical API, whether it's Vulkan, DirectX, or Metal, and WGPU is an open source library that Mozilla is a major contributor to. There's also a lot of work left to be done on this thing for Firefox, even on Windows, to improve the performance, to reduce the latency, and to add a few methods, notably to use it for video decoding. Now, I know that these features tend to annoy some people because you're basically turning your web browser into an entire operating system with direct hardware access, which does increase the attack surface for websites, basically, and for your web browser and on your system. So not necessarily a great thing always, but as soon as Chromium-based browsers have it, this means that 90% of the web browsers used in the world have it, and so you can't really not have it if you're an alternative web browser, because if you don't, you're gonna get incompatible with a lot of websites really quickly. Now, another week, another lawsuit against AI that probably won't be solved for years. This time it's against Anthropic, as 3 authors sued them for copyright infringement, alleging that the AI company used pirated book libraries to train their model. A US judge said that this can be turned into a class action lawsuit on behalf of all authors whose work would have been downloaded from those same pirate libraries back in 2021 and 2022. The judge says that Anthropic may have illegally downloaded up to 7 million books, which would potentially expose them to billions of dollars in damages, which I think could probably bankrupt that company, because even though they probably have billions of dollars in investor money, they have to burn that money to actually work because they don't generate any cash right now. Of course, Anthropic is looking to challenge that ruling, but the arguments, as always with AI companies, are extremely flimsy. They're not saying, oh, we didn't do it. They're saying it's hard to prove copyright infringement on such a massive scale. But as always, AI companies' arguments for why they don't pay creators and authors are always along the lines of, if we had to pay, it would cost us millions, which, yeah, it's not like they have any ground to stand on anyway. Some use cases for AI are fair use, and the judge, apparently in that case, ruled that Anthropic did do something along the lines of fair use with those books, but using pirated copies is still illegal, even if you use them for something that is fair use. So this is why this can be turned into a class action. Hopefully this puts an end to this madness that we're living through right now, but I'm not too hopeful. Common sense rarely prevails over money and laziness and stupidity, so yeah, AI is probably gonna win. And let's conclude with some gaming, because as x86 emulation on ARM seems to be mostly ready right now, including for games, there's also work on x86 emulation for RISC V with the Felix86 project. This lets you run x86 apps on RISC V on Linux. And this now includes Steam and some big games like Crysis or The Witcher 2 and 3. Games that use Steam DRM should also work now. It is early days, performance might be terrible, but it is a nice proof of concept. Felix86 is also working on better system integration with file system emulation using a separate executable, and they're also working on letting users run the entire emulator a bit more easily through an emulated bash. Much like ARM emulation, if it progresses well enough and it becomes a stable way to access x86 software on RISC V devices, it will likely end up being packaged and pre-configured by distributions like what Fedora did with FEX, for example. And sure, RISC V is not extremely popular right now. They don't really have a big flagship product like you would have for ARM with the recent Macs, but it's still getting a lot of attention. We're seeing a lot of projects adopt it and start trying to provide boards with it and try to port Linux to it, but it's the usual chicken and egg problem. If you can't run your usual software, you're never gonna buy it, and if no one uses it, no one is compiling or building the software for that architecture. So having the emulator bridges that gap for the initial years or decades where the architecture is starting to take off, and then you can actually start porting the software to it, and you also still have a way to run stuff that hasn't been ported. So congrats on the developers for this. Hopefully it does for RISC V what FEX and Box86 and stuff like that did for ARM as well. In the meantime though, if you need excellent x86 devices, you have our sponsor, Tuxedo Computers. Tuxedo makes laptops and desktops that ship with Linux pre-installed. They are based in Germany, but they ship to most countries in the world. They have a big range of devices that should cover every need and every price point, whether you're looking for an affordable entry-level laptop all the way up to a giant gaming desktop or gaming laptop or a workstation. They have it all, plenty of options to customize the keyboard layout, the logo, and the components. I personally only use their PCs nowadays. I edit and record everything that you see or hear from me on one of their computers. It's a laptop, the Infinity Book Pro 16, and I do all my gaming on one of their PCs, the Tuxedo Cube, which is plugged into my TV as a gaming console. As always, if you need a new computer and you want to use Linux and you want to support a company that actually contributes to Linux, then click the link in the description below. So, this will conclude today's episode. I hope you enjoyed listening to it, watching it while you were cleaning your windows, your floors, or driving to some place. I don't know what you do, I don't want to know. Anyway, you know where all the links are, as usual, including the links to support the channel, to the sponsors, whatever. You know how things work, you know where the buttons are, you know why you should click them, and I guess you'll see me in the next video. Bye!